And we have Dr. John on the line. Good morning, Dr. John.
Yeah, good morning, Mick.
It's great to have you back again today, Dr. John, although I can't even see you today. Normally we have like a little camera going both ways, and, well, actually you can't see me. There's a camera issue on one end of us at the moment. This lockdown stuff, it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah, well, look, I think we're in about our 10th or 11th week. It's, makes you wonder if there's ever going to be any return to the normal that we once knew. It seems like a long time ago, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
I think what you see is the pincers of control are getting stricter by the day.
Yes,
and
yes.
Of course that's what our Bible's been prophesying for about 2,000 years, and it seems as though unless we bow the knee to Big Brother and do what we're told, all sorts of restrictions are going to be placed on us.
Yes, yes.
Well, I mean, what does our Bible tell us? Won't be able to buy or sell without a particular mark. It's all heading that way, isn't it?
Yes, well, it's certainly it looks like a precursor to that sort of stuff, and I mean, we can only pray about it, but at the end of the day, if it's been prophesied in the Bible, it's going to happen. What's in there is true.
That's right, and it's exciting times because the Lord said, when you see all these things happening, look up because your salvation's drawing near. So, it might be bad news to many, but good news to some,
Absolutely.
Like us.
Yes. Now, Dr. John, Creation Ministries has a website, creation.com. And, of course, there's a lot of information on that website. How often do you go to the website?
Well, I go probably, I wouldn't say daily because I get daily emails, you see, and my emails tell me the article that's been published on the website that day. Yes. So I don't have to go to the website to look at it. But if I want to look at what's been published over the last week, then I go to the website and scroll through the articles for each day.
Yes.
But look, this is what I would encourage people to be doing, by the way, because it's all very well to go there if you've got a question, and that's great because you can use the search window, type in your question, and you'll get a whole lot of articles on that particular topic that you can choose to read or print out or do whatever you like with them, and it's all free. But every day, or not every day, 6 days a week, there's a new article published, and they are really fantastic. And there's a lot of good information. Some of them are reprints of a previous very popular article, but many of them are new as well. And it's really worthwhile reading those because, particularly if you're a student or a Christian who's got any uncertainties about your faith, those articles are a fantastic encouragement because what you see in them is how true the Bible always is. All the new scientific discoveries, when you examine them carefully, you see that they all fit the picture of what the Bible has said as far as history is concerned.
Yes.
And, I mean, the articles that they may be referring to, like some of the stuff we discuss out of Science Alert and so on, they'll have the evolutionary slant and they'll talk about the millions and billions of years and how it's all evolved. But you can see when it's examined closely that that's really not true. And of course that's one of the things that I was going to talk about this morning. This wasn't on the website, but a friend sent me an article about a four-legged creature, fossil found in Peru. And it was decided that this was a whale fossil. Now, a lot of our listeners might not be aware that the secular world believes that whales evolved from a land predator. And supposedly this land predator continually had to dive into the water chasing either prey that it was predatory upon on the land or something that it spotted in the water, and it ended up supposedly liking the aquatic environment so much that it adapted to it, rather than change it, than continue with its earlier life on land. But really, it's amazing how some of these stories were concocted in the first place. One of the earliest claims of a whale fossil was a creature that was called Pachycetus. Pachy meaning Pakistan, and cetus meaning whale, cetaceans, whale-type creatures.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that was found of this were a few bones, and they decided that it had to have been a precursor of the whale. Not that there was any evidence for that, it was just that the guy who found it decided that's what it was.
Yeah.
And most of the evolutionists think that the precursor of whales was about the size of a cow. Now, the cow's a bit smaller than a blue whale, as you probably...
A lot smaller, a lot smaller.
But, I mean, the blue whale's heart's about the size of a cow. Amazing, isn't it? And anyway, that's no problem to the evolutionists. And apart from size, the aquatic mammals have got quite a few differences to the land mammals, and they must have given up on whatever prey they used to find on land, and they must have acquired a taste for krill.
Yes.
It really it blows your mind when you think about it. Anyway, this supposed whale precursor that they found in Peru was about 4 meters long. Now, that's not not much approaching a blue whale, but it was about 4 meters long. They said it had 4 legs, webbed feet, and hooves. Now, I don't quite know how you can have both webbed feet and hooves. That's a bit of an interesting combination.
Yes.
And supposedly they thought it could walk on land. And it wasn't found buried in the ocean sands, of course. It was a couple of kilometres inland and found in sediment. So quite a distance from the Peruvian Pacific coast. But anyway, there you go. That's what they decided it was. And how they could say it was a precursor to whales, I really don't know, because the transition from a land mammal to an aquatic mammal would be enormous.
In fact, I've heard in the past where they talk about aquatic animals becoming land animals. Now they've gone the other way.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, supposedly we all started off in the sea, and because it was much better to crawl out onto land as we evolved, then that's what we did. But, whales must have decided that they didn't like it there, and they kept diving back into the water in search of their conventional prey, and then they adapted to it by staying in there. So,
yeah, well, I've got to say, really, Dr. John, I really like caviar and prawns. I'm wondering whether maybe my grandchildren are going to turn back into fish.
Well, do you remember that movie? Who was it? Kevin Costner. You remember he started to grow gills, or
yeah, okay.
What was it called? I forget the name of that movie. You remember what it was?
Look, I don't know, and I doubt it's really going to happen, Dr. John. I think it's beyond us. Look, I think we might go into a quick break right now. It's 21 minutes past 8. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Please send your questions through. Anything about creation, evolution, all that sort of stuff, send them through to Dr. John. The number to text them to or SMS them to is 0401 949 949. That's 0401 949 949. You were talking about that guy that breathes underwater, and one of our listeners has just sent through a text saying, was it Aquaman? And so I've gone and looked it up, and it looks like Aquaman was Jason Momoa. And I've got a feeling that Kevin Costner was in one called Waterworld.
Yeah, well, the one I was thinking of was definitely Kevin Costner.
Yep, okay.
So I think it might have been water. Well, and I've got a feeling there was some land mass, well, not a land mass, some construction.
Yeah, out in the middle of the water.
Yeah, that's right. But anyway, he'd adapted pretty well, and he'd started to grow gills.
Yes.
Yeah, look, and I mean, how ridiculous it all is. I mean, that's just Hollywood, of course. But we spoke a couple of weeks ago about the huge number of adaptations and changes that would be required to turn a reptile into a bird. And I mentioned how absolutely impossible that is, even though that's what so many evolutionists believe. And they believe it on the basis of some similarities. I mean, but they both have scales. Chooks have scales on their legs. They hatch out of eggs, and some of the footprints that they leave on the surface seem to look similar. But just as those changes would be impossible, so would the changes of a land-dwelling mammal into a whale-like creature be impossible. And you remember we discussed how evolution can only progress by 1 point mutation at a time.
Yep.
And what we're talking about is a genetic code of millions and billions of letters, and there are only 4 of them. And each change or mutation is really a copying mistake. It's a corruption or a glitch in the program.
Yep.
And as we know from computer programs, corruptions and glitches don't usually make it run any better. They usually make it run quite a bit worse if it runs at all.
Yes.
And that's really the case with mutations, because they're almost invariably harmful. And the millions and millions of mutations that you would need to change certain features of a land mammal into an aquatic mammal are enormous. And one of the changes that's never been observed in any of the supposed transitional fossils is a blowhole. Now, the guy who discovered that original one, Pachycetus, was only a few bones, and of course when all the other bones were discovered, it didn't have a blowhole. So obviously it couldn't really have been a whale precursor. And blowholes are a pretty interesting, well, I won't say development, a pretty interesting thing for a mammal to have.
Yeah.
Because the blowhole has nostrils, and they close when the animal goes under the water, and when it comes up to breathe up, they open, and there she blows, you know.
Yeah.
And
we've got Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International, who's been talking to us this morning about evolution and what some of the evolutionists have been saying is going on. Well, picking on whales this morning, about how a land-dwelling animal about the size of a cow, the evolutionists have said it became a whale, like a big blue whale. Well, that was an interesting one. Dr. John, when it comes to evolution, a question that I've had, and I'm sure many other people have the same question, is, and I know that you've said before, you know, people talk about evolution and you say single changes happen one at a time, and quite often, you know, a new limb or a new thing is an entire machine. It's lots of changes that sort of couldn't happen one thing at a time. Now, in our lifetime, we've seen, obviously, you know, just walking down the street, people who have a deformation for one reason or another. I remember the children that went through, you know, the whole thalidomide thing a little while ago, and people are born with deformed. They have a deformed arm or whatever it might be. And my question is, how often do their children then have that same deformation? Does it pass into the sort of the future generations?
Well, it would if it were in their genetic makeup, Mick, but a lot of the deformities, and you mentioned thalidomide. Now, thalidomide, of course, is one of the greatest tragedies of all time as far as the pharmaceutical industry was concerned. And the problem was thalidomide was a medication that had been developed for pregnancy sickness. Mm-hmm. And, of course, so many women took it for that very reason, for pregnancy sickness. And, of course, at the time they were taking it, it was about the time that the limb buds were developing in the baby. Yep. And that medication interfered with that development, which was why they were born with that deformity. But that deformity was not there in their genetic makeup. Mm. If there are things like 6 toes or on a foot or whatever that are actually part of the person's genetic makeup, then that will be passed on. But things that are developmental abnormalities as a result of medication like thalidomide, or there's another one, Mick, that we can mention. For the last 4,000 years or so, mm-hmm. every little Jewish boy has had a particular small operation. Mm-hmm. But none of the little Jewish boys are ever born not needing that operation.
Yes, okay.
And it's been going on for 4,000 years. So really, it's obviously not passed on in the genetics.
Okay, so we can't force it, basically, by cutting something off or adding something ourselves.
No, we can't. We can't. It's
unless we use CRISPR and go into the genes.
Yeah, that's right. But look, we were talking about the whales and their blowholes, and if you think about it, we then talked about how evolutionists believe that sea creatures crawled out onto land and then evolved whatever they had in the way of breathing apparatus on land, mm-hmm. and that would have included snouts and nostrils and so on. Yep. And yet some creatures supposedly decided to dive back into the water, and that those nostrils migrated back on their head and became a blowhole. Mm. But it didn't happen to all of them. It seemed to only happen to whales and dolphins and porpoises and the like. Yeah. But what about seals and sea lions and walruses and so on? They couldn't have seen it as being quite as necessary. Yes. Even our own platypus, he didn't develop a blowhole either, did he? No. You know, when you have a look at the snout of a platypus, he's got a couple of little nostrils there on his snout. Yep. So, really, you'd reckon if such transitions were possible, that the other aquatic mammals would have developed them as well. Mm. But look, the other interesting thing too that the whales and porpoises and dolphins have got is a fluked tail, and of course that tail doesn't go from side to side. They don't wag their tails like a dog, do they? They wag it up and down. Mm. And that means, of course, an entirely different group of muscles are required. And as we mentioned when we talked about the transition supposedly from reptiles into birds, if you have a new muscle, then that muscle has to have a nerve supply and a blood supply. And the nerve has to transition up the spinal cord into the brain and be integrated with all the other neurons there. Mm. So, number of single changes that are required for even one muscle run into the millions, and they've all got to be absolutely working perfectly right from the start. I mean,
and you do have to ask the question, if it was a land-based mammal that sort of, ended up in the water, well, why didn't it end up wagging its tail like a shark from side to side?
Yeah, well, that's right. A shark's a fish. Mm. So it's pretty obvious, really, when you think about it, that whales and porpoises and dolphins have been designed with a blowhole and a tail that goes up and down, whereas seals and walruses and platypuses and the like have been designed without a blowhole and with tails that move in the conventional manner.
Yeah.
So really, when you think about it, it's a whole lot of nonsense, and it's not based on evidence. This is the whole point. Our Bible tells us that animals were created after their kind. Now, kind is an interesting word because there are lots of different species, which is a man-made word, in amongst the kind. And there have been some classic examples with whales of hybrids that have occurred between what appeared to be completely different types of whale.
Yeah.
And there was one relatively recently of a hybrid between a false killer whale and another creature that was completely different, but they happened to be sharing the same pool in a theme park, and lo and behold, it was a false killer whale and a dolphin. And they produced a wolphin. So I mean, they look to be entirely different creatures, and yet they were able to interbreed. So really, they were just two of the same kind that had diversified into their ecological niche out in the outside world.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of thing that we've observed quite frequently. And, of course, these creatures like whales and dolphins, they don't get decompression sickness when they dive. You know, they can dive to enormous depths, but they can resurface without getting any decompression sickness.
Yeah, well, I know they go down for a fair while, Dr. John. When I go out to the Skillions sometimes, I watch the whales, they jump about, and you can almost guarantee it's when somebody else walks up near me and I go, oh, look at the whales over there, and I point, and they go down. And they stay down for so long. I go, oh, I'm so sorry. There really was whales there. I promise they were just over there. And we have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. Please send your questions through 0401 949 949. Now, this morning we've been talking about evolution, and I guess some evolutionists have been saying that they believe this animal, a bit like a cow, turned into the modern-day whale. I say the modern-day whale, we believe it was the everyday whale, but the evolutionists believe that has what it's evolved into. And Dr. John's been talking about how incredibly difficult that would have been, in fact, impossible that would have been.
Yeah, well, certainly, Mick, the number of single mutational changes that would have been required to develop a blowhole, to develop a tail that moved up and down, and the musculature that went with that, and the ability to dive to enormous depths and not get any decompression sickness and so on. So really, when you think about it, evolution really is an impossibility. And the amazing thing really is that people can spend, this is various scientists, can spend their whole lives researching these things and really get nowhere because there is no evidence for it. Most of the stories that are concocted really are very, very fanciful, and they don't have any evidence backing them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, because we've been talking about whales, there have been a lot of intriguing discoveries related to genuine fossilized whales. Yep. And there have been quite a few discoveries in South America. I mean, the one that we were talking about this morning about the claimed whale precursor was in Peru. But there's a place in Chile up on the slopes of the Andes Mountains, and I think you've mentioned it a couple of times on this program. They call it Whale Hill. And it's right alongside the Pan American Highway. And it's very interesting when you see a photograph of that. I think it's on the landward side of the Pan American Highway, not the Pacific side anyway.
Yep.
But right up on this hill, there are thousands of whale fossils, and they all seem to be orientated in the same direction. And amazingly enough, they're all upside down. And nobody really has a great explanation for that. Well, creationists do, of course, but evolutionists don't know what would have put them up there, why they would have died. They assume that they must have been poisoned by some poisonous algal bloom. Now, how they've decided on that, I don't know, because it
sounds interesting. If they were all facing the same way, Dr. John, that they all got poisoned at exactly the same time, and they must have died instantly. Yeah,
and then turned upside down. That's that's called turning turtle, I think, rather than turning whale.
Hey, we know that happens. I've seen it on all the cartoons.
Yeah, and there's no evidence of fossil algae, so they must have eaten them elsewhere and managed to climb up the hill to get themselves fossilised. So really, it is quite an intriguing story. But from a biblical point of view, we don't really have any problem explaining that, because as we know, Noah was not required to take any of the aquatic animals on board the ark. They were excluded. He only had to take land-dwelling, air-breathing animals. So he didn't have to take any whales and porpoises and the like. But that doesn't mean that any of those marine creatures, either fish or mammals, would have got off scot-free in Noah's flood.
Yeah.
Because there were so many tectonic upheavals, and particularly at the end of the flood, when the mountains were pushed up and the valleys sank down, big pods of whales could easily have been thrown up there on a hillside as the mountain went up and got buried in sediment and so on. So it's not difficult to explain when you look at it from a biblical perspective. Yeah. But it's very difficult to explain when you look at it from a secular perspective.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Really, I think that's the bottom line for believers. We know that everything that gets discovered really will fit in perfectly well with biblical history. But as far as the secular world's concerned, lots of amazing stories have to be concocted to try and explain some of the things that we observe. So the evidence doesn't speak for itself. The evidence is there, but what we say is that it usually fits perfectly well in with biblical history, but it doesn't fit very well with the explanations that the scientists seem to come up with.
Absolutely. Dr. John, it is 5 minutes to 9. Another week done. I've got to ask, are you here next week?
Yes, at this stage, Mick, unless anything untoward happens, I'll be ready for next week, and hopefully your camera will be okay.
Yes. It's been a little interesting this morning, trying to communicate with each other sort of when we've got to play music, or as, you know, when the news happened. You can't really say anything on a phone when the other person's talking. Well, thank you so much, Dr. John, for enduring without any visual. And I'm pretty sure it will be working next week. It's the first time it's never worked. So
yes, well, look, Mick, let's encourage the listeners to text in their questions again, because there we had one of our listeners came back very, very quickly with Aquaman when we were talking about the underwater world that Kevin Costner was in, and we decided, I think it was actually called Waterworld, the movie that we were talking about.
Yeah, well, that same listeners got back to us and said, yes, it was Waterworld.
Yeah, and we really want listeners to text in their questions. Don't try and ring them in. Text them in, and we'll deal with them on air.
Absolutely. The number 0401 949 949. If you have any questions right now, please send them through to us. 0401 949 949, and Dr. John will have an answer that we can talk about next week. So remember, that text line 0401 949 949. Thank you so much, Dr. John, for another awesome week.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. That's terrific. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.